We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and we're here to talk about UFC Vegas 9 at the Apex in Las Vegas. We have an interesting main event this weekend between the MMA legend and UFC veteran Alistair Overeem versus the young, streaking Augusto Sakai. I feel like this fight is one of those fights where we're going to find out a lot about both of these heavyweights and where they're at in this stage of their careers. But just before we get into the breakdowns, we're coming off a very good week at MMAPlay365. Robbie Lawler was the dog of the week, so obviously that missed. A little disappointed there too, as I thought Lawler would be extremely competitive, and I definitely didn't think he would try and grapple with Magny. But on the positive side, we cashed an easy parlay with Sean Brady and the future UFC light heavyweight champion Alexander Rakic, along with cashing on Ricardo Lamas straight as well. That should have been a parlay with Magomed Ankalaev, but obviously the MMA gods took that from us once again, and the Fun Gamblers fire streak continues with 2 out of the 3 pre-built parlays winning and 12 out of the 15 parlay pieces in the create your own parlay section winning too. Remember, we have multiple packages on the MMA Play 365 website with UFC betting advice and daily fantasy sports content for DraftKings and FanDuel too. We also have various subscription lengths and options as well, so to see our full service list, please go and visit MMAPlay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And let's break down some fights in the main event of the evening in the heavyweight division. We've got Alistair Overeem versus Augusto Sakai. Overeem currently the minus 145 favourite. The comeback on Sakai at plus 125 as the underdog. Now this betting line's actually moved a little bit over the last couple of days. Augusto Sakai opened at around plus 170. It seems all the money's coming on him. He's now sitting, as I've mentioned, at plus 125. So big movement in that respect. And as for where the value lies, in my opinion in this fight, I think it lies with the underdog still in Sakai. He definitely shouldn't have been plus 170. At plus 125, I still think there's value on him at plus money. I'm not saying that Sakai should be the favourite in this fight, but I definitely think that it warranted being a pick'em. We'll see how the fight plays out, but that's where I saw it anyway. As for where the betting line moves, I do see more money coming in on Sakai. I think that he might hit the plus 100 mark. He might even go to minus 105, but I do think at some point when he hits a certain number, we'll start to see an influx of Overeem bets, because at that point, I think the veteran and a guy that's actually been delivering over the last couple of fights still is going to get some more love on the betting line. I think that if this was to hit minus 115, minus 110 for Overeem, I think people will see a ton of value in that, and it could push Sakai back out to a plus number again. Ultimately, I think we're going to see it close Sakai maybe plus 100, plus 110 come fight night. And as for how this fight plays out, I've touched upon it a little bit already. I said Overeem has been delivering in his last couple of fights. Obviously, the fight before last was Jair Rosenstruik. Rosenstruik beat him. He knocked him out with only 4 seconds to go in a 25-minute, 5-round fight. But before that, Overeem was winning rounds. I think Overeem was on the way to winning a decision as well. So, although he lost that fight, he still performed on the night, and in my opinion was the better fighter until the knockout. But this is where I ultimately think that it's difficult to get a solid read on Alistair Overeem right now, because he looked terrible in the Walt Harris fight until Harris overexerted, couldn't get that knockout twice, and then gassed himself. Jair Rosenstruik, he lost a fight in a fight that I think he was winning the rounds, even though he didn't look spectacular in that fight. Oleinik, he was taking some punches, barrages of punches early on. He ended up winning that round even in the first round. I say early on, a lot happened in that round 1. Pavlovich was a fighter I think a lot of people expected Overeem to lose. Overeem finished him in round 1. Curtis Blades, he got beaten badly on the ground, cut open badly. Francis Ngannou, he got knocked out badly as well. So the point is with Overeem here, I'm just not sure what Overeem's going to turn up, because he's been winning fights that he's looked terrible in. He's been losing fights that he was winning in. It's just a real mystery of what Overeem is going to look like inside the cage. Is he going to be performing well and then suddenly deaded? Is he going to be dropped a couple of times early on, looking like he's on the way out, and then suddenly pulling a win out of nowhere? It's just a real mystery, as I've already mentioned. With Sakai though, Sakai's a young fighter. He's coming through in the UFC. He's 4-0 in the UFC. And that's really key, that the fact that he's 4-0, because he's had a few fights in the UFC where he hasn't looked that great. He's not looked that exciting. The fight's a little bit sketchy. And I'll give you some examples. So Chase Sherman, he drops round 1 against Sherman. He doesn't start round 2 very well, but he ends up getting through round 2 with a close round 2, and he finishes Sherman in round 3. Then in his fight after that, he fights Andrei Arlovski. Now, at the time when I watched that fight live, I did think Andrei Arlovski won that fight. I was very surprised to see Sakai get the split decision win, but after rewatching it a couple of times since then, I don't think it was as controversial as what some other people think. It was a close fight that Sakai got his hand raised, but regardless, it is a controversial win because the majority of people speak that Arlovski should have won that fight. So again, a bit of a sketchy fight. To Bora, there was nothing sketchy there. Sakai performed really well, knocked him out in round 1. And then in his last fight against Blagoy-Ivanov, it was a split decision. I did think the right man won with Sakai, but in the 3rd round, Sakai grabbed the fence on a takedown. That could have changed the end of the fight, ultimately changing the judges' decisions on the scorecards as well. So again, not a clear-cut win. And then now he's stepping in against Overeem, who, as I've already mentioned, he's an MMA legend. He's a veteran of the UFC. He's a guy at this point that's just got a ton of experience, and he can use that experience to edge out close fights at this stage in his career. This fight could be a close fight, so that's something to keep in mind. But the reason I said that the 4-0 is really important for Sakai in the UFC is because regardless of what you think of him, regardless of what you think of his fights, whether they've been close, whether some may have been sketchy, the fact is that he is undefeated inside the octagon in the UFC. He's 4-0. He's doing what he needs to do to get the wins. And he's in this position he's in right now in a main event heavyweight fight with a legend like Alistair Overeem for a reason. I think that this fight could be close in stages, but when I think about how these two match up stylistically, I do think Overeem should try and take Sakai down to the mat. The problem is Overeem's takedowns, as we saw in the Rosenstruik fight, aren't that well set up. They can be a little bit telegraphed. Sakai's a big dude, so taking him down is not going to be too easy. But if Overeem can get in on the hips of Sakai, maybe trip him down to the mat so he's not having to expend energy and trying to lift Sakai, if he can get on top, Overeem's actually got quite underrated top control in my opinion. He can stay on top and he can work and he can land strikes, but it's if he can get those takedowns and how committed he will be to the takedown as well. I think if this fight stays standing, I think both Overeem and Sakai will have moments of success where they're doing well in this fight. Ultimately, I think if this goes the distance, so if there's not a finish in this fight, I think Augusto Sakai is probably going to land more volume. He's not a heavy volume type of fighter, but I do think he's going to be the aggressor in this fight. I do think that he's going to be the one pushing Overeem back for longer periods in this fight. And for that reason, he should be getting off on more strikes, straight punches. I also really like the addition of the kicks that he added in the Ivanov fight as well. It's not something we saw too much prior to that fight, but his kicks up and down the body, especially the leg kick, the lead leg of Ivanov in that fight, and if he'd kept on it solidly over 3 rounds, he might have ended up even finishing Ivanov with that low kick, but he did stop the longer the fight went on. It became more sporadic rather than really hammering down on it. But the kicks up and down the body I really like from Sakai. He should use that in this fight because Overeem will be firing kicks at him as well. Ultimately, I think we're going to get a decision in this fight. I think we're going to see the fight hit the scorecards. I think what the judges will see is Augusto Sakai moving forward the majority of the fight, landing the slightly harder strikes, slightly more volume of strikes as well. And if anything, if there's a finish in this fight, I think that that's more likely to be Sakai finishing Overeem than the other way around as well. So I do think Sakai's the more likely fighter to win on the scorecards. I think Sakai's the more likely fighter to finish Overeem. Overeem's probably got more paths to victory if he uses the takedowns, but I'm not convinced he's going to be relentless or aggressive with his wrestling. So that does lead me to think that Overeem might be reducing a path to victory there. So I think the fight does favour Sakai very slightly. So I'm going to be picking Augusto Sakai to win the fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got the rebooking of Ovince Preux versus Alonzo Menifield. If you remember just a couple of weeks ago, we were a couple of hours away from Fight Night. Ovince Preux got a positive COVID test. They pulled the fight from the card. They've rebooked it a couple of weeks later, which in my opinion is way too soon. I'll touch upon that lately. But as for the betting lines, they're not too different from what they were last time. We've got Alonzo Menifield, the current minus 130 favourite, the comeback on Ovince St. Preux at plus 110 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, it's going to be very similar to the breakdown that I broke down just a couple of weeks ago, because not a great deal has changed since then. I think that the value is with Alonzo Menifield at minus 130. I do think he's the rightful favourite. I know a lot of people are really high on OSP in this spot, but I like Alonzo Menifield. As for where the line moves, I'm not too sure, because the closer we got to Fight Night last time, Alonzo Menifield was dropping further down, minus 115. I think he was even minus 110 in some spots. But this time it seems to be going the other way, and I don't know whether that's because people think that OSP might be genuinely affected from the COVID test. I don't know whether it's going to be that second weight cut for OSP that might take more of a toll on his body than Menifield's. So there's a couple of things to talk about here, but as for where the line moves, I think it might close roughly where we're at right about now. I would have said maybe it would close into a pick-em, but like I say, I'm not too sure, because the line's been fluctuating for different reasons, and it's really hard to get a good read on that betting line and where it's going to move. It wouldn't shock me to see Alonzo Menifield close at minus 130, minus 125. As for how this fight plays out, as I mentioned last time, from a stylistic perspective, I do think it favours Alonzo Menifield. Alonzo Menifield is huge for the division in regards to how thick he is. OSP is the taller fighter, of course, the longer fighter, but Menifield has got so much power in his hands. In my opinion, I think he's the hardest hitter in the light heavyweight division. I think when the dude touches your chin, he's going to mess your face up. We saw that in the Devin Clark fight. He hit Devin Clark with one shot and suddenly his eyes busted for the rest of the fight. Yes, Menifield lost that fight. Yes, he didn't look overly great towards the end of the fight, and that's one question people have had on Menifield. What's his cardio going to be like? What is his gas tank going to be like if he's pushed late in a fight? And when I watched that fight live, I honestly thought that Menifield did look terrible, but rewatching it wasn't as bad as what I initially thought. I think that, yes, Menifield could have had more gas left in the tank come later in the fight, but he was still active, he was still moving forward, he was still engaging in the clinch, he was still able to work inside the clinch when Clark was pushing Menifield's gas tank to the limits as well, and he was defending takedowns. And this is a really key thing, because OSP's key path to victory in this fight, in my opinion, is to get Menifield down and to submit him. And from a power puncher who's absolutely huge with a questionable gas tank and hasn't had that many years as a professional mixed martial artist, he's actually got decent takedown defense. He was defending every takedown from Clark until I think the 8th or the 9th one, where Clark actually took him down. And even in that situation, he was put in a bad spot for a few seconds, but he ended up getting back up to his feet as well. So although he's a great striker in regards to power and putting people out, I do think you can clearly see that he's put the work in on the mat with his wrestling defense and with his get-ups as well. I think Devin Clark's a better wrestler than OSP. I think if Clark's needing 7 or 8 attempts to take Menifield down, then I'm not sure how easy OSP is going to get this guy down. And I think if in the early stages of this fight, Menifield comes forward and starts hitting OSP with a barrage of punches, I'm just not sure OSP is going to be able to take those punches. I think 2, 3, maybe 4 clean punches to the face of OSP and you'll be seeing him either turtling up or dropping, and I think Menifield will take advantage from there. The things that we need to talk about though in regards to the COVID positive test is the weigh-ins. Yes, they've both got to weigh in again. I do think that that's a little bit of an advantage for Menifield over OSP. I think OSP has a much tougher cut than Menifield, so doing that twice in 2 weeks, I think that we could see an OSP that might be a little more drained than what he might have been in the last fight. But ultimately, and I don't mean to be the killjoy here or the fun sponge, but I genuinely don't think this fight's going to happen on Saturday night. We saw last week Ion Cutelaba tested positive for COVID-19 again. He still had some positive COVID cells in his body from that retest. This is just 2 weeks ago that this fight got pulled, so it's absolutely a possibility that Ovince St. Preux has still got some positive COVID cells in his body. If he does, then he's going to test positive again and the fight's going to get scrapped again. So I personally think they should have waited 4 or 5 weeks before rebooking this fight if that's what both fighters wanted to do. I'm just not confident this fight's going to happen. happen. If he manages to test negative on another COVID test, then that's fine. I'm happy. I want to see this fight. But I wouldn't be shocked at all if we got to Saturday and OSP had tested positive again for COVID and the fight was scrapped. Going back to the pick of this fight, I think that Alonzo Menifield can defend the takedowns. I think his cardio issues are a little over-exaggerated, but regardless, I think that he comes forward hard in round one. I think he puts it on OSP. I think he hits OSP a few times hard in the face, and I think we see OSP crumble from there. So I'm picking Alonzo Menifield to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Karol Rosa versus Sijara Eubanks. Rosa currently the -130 favourite. The comeback on Eubanks at +100 as the slight underdog. As for where the value is in this betting line, I think the value is with the underdog in Eubanks. I'm a little confused to why this line isn't flipped, why we're not seeing Eubanks at -130 and Rosa at +100. I really did expect to see Eubanks as the favourite in this fight, maybe even up to -150. But Rosa's the favourite, so I think the value is with Eubanks. As for where the betting line moves, I think that it is going to tighten up the closer we get to Saturday night. It wouldn't shock me at all to see a pick'em if more money was to come in on Eubanks. And just to bear in mind, Eubanks actually opened up at +140 as well, so there was quick action on that early line. And I wouldn't be shocked at all to see a line flip either. If Eubanks was to go -120, -125 come Saturday night, it wouldn't shock me at all. I'm not saying Eubanks is going to run straight through Rosa, but when you look at the competition that Eubanks has fought compared to the competition that Rosa's fought, sure, Rosa's got the more experience in mixed martial arts as a professional fighter, but Eubanks has been in there with some really good fighters, so that's why I am a little bit surprised by the line, and that's why I expect it to close up and maybe even flip come Saturday night. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I think we're going to see a true mixed martial arts fight in this fight. I think we're going to see striking from either fighter. I think that we're going to see takedowns from both fighters as well. I just think that although Karol Rosa is aggressive, she does come forward, she does land some nice volume as well. I think Eubanks is the slightly quicker fighter, the slightly more technical fighter on the feet, the one that will mix it up more with kicks and punches. I think that if Eubanks just wants to go straight to the wrestling, I think she can take Rosa down. It might not be easy in the early stages, but she will get her down a couple of times in the fight should she want to, and those could be round winning takedowns, especially if she spends some time on top as well. The only real red flag I've got with Eubanks in this fight is the cardio, because if she does go hard early on, if Rosa does push that pace early on, then it could really wear on Eubanks. And if Rosa takes one of those first two rounds, say the second round for example, and Eubanks is starting to tire, Rosa's likely to take that third round as well, and then you could get in a very difficult situation on the judges' scorecards if you Sijara Eubanks, or if you've bet Sijara Eubanks, because that fight could be a split, she might take that loss. I'm just not confident that that actually happens though. I think Eubanks is good enough to start strong and win round one. I think she's good enough to take round two as well. Again, as long as she doesn't overexert herself and she doesn't completely blow that gas tank in round one, she could comfortably take round two. And then come round three, she might start tiring. Rosa might take over the fight. It all depends on how aggressive Rosa is inside the cage, because if she can push that pace early on against Eubanks, I think that gives her the best opportunity to win the fight. But like I say, when you look at the striking, I think Eubanks is more technical. I think she's the fighter that will mix those strikes up, as I've already mentioned, with kicks and punches up and down the body, and she's the more likely fighter to mix in the takedowns as well. And like I say, that could be key to winning this fight. If some of these rounds are close, but Eubanks gets a takedown and spends 30, 60, maybe 90 seconds on top, she's very likely going to make the judges score that round for her opposed to Rosa. So I think that Eubanks has got the slightly more paths to victory in this fight. She's the more experienced fighter in regards to the level of competition that she's been fighting. So for those reasons, I'm going to pick Sijara Eubanks to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a really fun fight. This could be fight of the night as well. We've got Michel Pereira versus Zelim Imadaev. Pereira currently -115. The comeback on Imadaev is -105 as the slight underdog. Just bear in mind as well, Zelim Imadaev opened up at +155, which I think is absolutely absurd. All that early action came in, and Imadaev pushed him back into minus money, and now it's very close to a pick'em. As for where the value is in this fight, I think if you've got a good read on this this fight. Either side is playable for sure. I definitely don't think Michel Pereira was playable at the minus 185 line that he opened up at. The same would go for Zelim Imadaev as well. If he was minus 185 or around that line, I don't think he would be playable either. But I think the lines are fair as they are right now, really close. And as we get closer to Saturday night, fight night, I do think that the lines will close up just that little bit more as well. And it wouldn't shock me to see both of these fighters enter the cage at a pick'em. As for how this fight plays out, I do think it depends on what Pereira we see, because if we see the Pereira that's coming out there and doing backflips and somersaults and the craziest stuff you'll ever see inside a mixed martial arts cage, then I think that he's going to tire early on if he can't get Imadaev out of there. And that's a really big thing for Pereira. He can't go into fights doing that sort of stuff. Yes, it looks great. Yes, it's massively entertaining for us at home, but for a fighter to try and earn a win inside the UFC octagon, it's definitely not the best tactic, and I don't think he should be going into the fight doing that sort of stuff. If he's serious about getting that win, he didn't do it last time out against Diego Sanchez. He was a lot more reserved. He was conscious about his gas tank levels, which is great. I think that he's learned a lot from that Tristan Connolly fight. Not many people picked Tristan Connolly to beat Michel Pereira that night, yet he did, because of the actions that Michel Pereira took inside of the cage. So I do think that he's learned a little bit from that against Diego Sanchez, although he did end up taking the loss via DQ in round 3 from that illegal knee. I don't think Sanchez was actually that hurt, to be honest. You know, he was asking the questions of what would happen if he can't continue to fight, and then, you know, once it was apparent to him that Pereira would get DQ'd should he not be able to continue, he decided not to continue. Pereira was comfortably winning that fight. It was a little alarming that Pereira couldn't knock Diego Sanchez out with the power that he had, but like I say, I think he was just being much more reserved, much more technical, not trying to overexert himself and put power into places that it didn't need to be. He was comfortably winning that fight. So hopefully I'm right that he's learned from that Tristan Connolly loss, and if he has, then I think this fight is 100% winnable for him. If he doesn't, and he starts exerting energy that he doesn't have later down the fight, then we could see Imadaev potentially lose round 1 if he doesn't get finished, and then take over the fight just like we have seen before. Now with Imadaev, he's an aggressive fighter. He's a fighter that will strike on the feet. He will look for takedowns as well. He will try and mix it up. He does have skills in multiple areas in mixed martial arts, but I'm just not convinced of how good of a fighter he is in regards to being at this level inside the UFC. And the reason I say that is he's come into the UFC and he's 0-2. He got beat by Max Griffin on his UFC debut by majority decision. Max Griffin was the fighter that was really pushing the pace in that fight. Griffin was the one being aggressive, looking for takedowns. And then he went in there against Danny Roberts and got knocked out in round 2, and it was a bad knockout as well. So although Danny Roberts isn't a bad fighter, again, it's a fighter that Michel Pereira took out early in round 1 when they fought. So I know MMA math doesn't work like that. I'm just not sure to where Imadaev's ceiling is. If he can get Pereira tied in this fight early on and avoid getting knocked out in that first round, then I do think Imadaev is definitely going to be live to get a win for sure. I'm just not sure that he'll do that. I think Imadaev is going to come for a scrap as well. I think both fighters are going to be landing on each other really. I think Pereira is the bigger fighter, the stronger fighter, the fighter that holds more power, and I do expect Pereira to land something on Imadaev and finish him in the first round. If he doesn't though, and he's more technical like he was with Diego Sanchez, then I think Pereira again can just stay out of any trouble from Imadaev and just point his way to a decision as well. It's just if Pereira starts doing the crazy actions, the crazy somersaults, backflips, all that sort of stuff, it's really going to wear on his gas tank, and that's going to lead to Imadaev getting the win. After seeing the Diego Sanchez fight, like I say, I do think that Pereira has learned from mistakes. I think he's going to be the more technical fighter in there. He's got to keep the fight standing, because if Imadaev does take him down, spends time on top, he's going to win rounds. And if he makes Pereira stand back up and then takes him down again, then that's going to wear on the gas tank of Pereira as well. So the somersaults and the crazy actions aren't the only thing that will deplete that gas tank of Pereira. Imadaev's offensive wrestling will cause that. But again, can he take Pereira down? If so, can he do it often? Can he stay on top of him? I'm just not sure. I think in the early stages of this fight, they're both going to come to scrap. It's in the small cage as well, so there's not a lot of room to work. I think Pereira's going to land something on Imadaev, hurt him, and if he doesn't take him out of there, it'll have an effect going into the later rounds. So I am picking Michel Pereira to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is one that I've seen a lot of action on from the betting public. We've got Thiago Moises versus Jalin Turner. Moises currently the -175 favourite. The comeback on Turner at +155 as the underdog. As I mentioned, there's been a lot of action on this fight, predominantly towards Jalin Turner. He opened at about +175, +180. He's now sitting at +155, so the early action has come in on Turner, and that's pushed the line on Moises, obviously down from -200 to -175. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think it sits with the underdog in Jalin Turner. I personally would have lined this fight a little closer than where it is right now. As for where the line moves, I think that's the direction it takes as well. I do think that we see more money coming in on Jalin Turner. We might even see Jalin Turner push into a +110, +100 range, which is probably closer to where I personally line it. As for how this fight plays out, I think it's all dependent on Moises in this fight. Can Moises get that takedown? Because if he can't, then Turner's just going to light him up on the feet. He's the better striker. He's longer. He's taller. He's going to have a 6-inch height advantage, a 7-inch reach advantage. I've no idea what that works out in regards to leg reach as well, but I'm assuming that's going to be quite high. It all depends on if Moises can close that distance and take him down. But I actually don't think that Jalin Turner's wrestling defense is that bad. Sure, he got taken down a few times against Matt Frevola, but Matt Frevola is a much better offensive wrestler than what Moises is. But what I will say about the comparisons there is, I think Moises is a better submission grappler than Matt Frevola. Not that Matt Frevola's bad. I just think if Moises gets on top of Turner, that he's probably more likely to get a submission than what Matt Frevola was. But Moises needs to get Turner on the mat to win this fight. That's the bottom line. Turner was defending takedowns well against Frevola. He's got a different variety of defensive techniques. He was sprawling against Matt Frevola. He was grabbing the neck, threatening the guillotine to either better his position on the mat, to snap him down in a sprawl. And if he was taken down, then that submission threat is there with the guillotine as well. I don't think that's as alarming as somebody that will automatically grab a neck and drop down for a guillotine. I think that Turner's educated with that. We see other fighters using submission attempts to stand back up. Anthony Rocco Martin's one. He threatens with guillotines as well, along with Kimura's, to help scrambling scenarios and to help him get back up to his feet as well. So I don't think it's alarming that Turner uses a guillotine in that respect, but I don't think that Turner's defensive wrestling, his takedown defense, is that bad at all. And he's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on the mat as well. So if Moises does take him down, I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash. Turner did stand up time and time again once Frevola took him down. I think the only extended period of time Frevola spent on Turner was in that third round. He hit him with an explosive double leg takedown, got him down, spent some time on top. But aside from that, yes, Turner did lose a couple of the rounds from getting repeatedly taken down, but Frevola was spamming takedowns, and again, that's not Moises' style. I think that it's absolutely imperative that Moises takes Turner down in this fight, otherwise Turner's going to light him up on the feet. Turner's got deceptive power as well, and one key aspect of that striking between both fighters is Turner's a southpaw, Moises is an orthodox fighter. And I remember breaking down the Moises and Michael Johnson fight in Moises' last fight, and I remember saying the same things. Because Johnson was a southpaw fighter, it takes a lot of the best weapons Moises has on the feet away from him. Moises' style is definitely suited better to fighting a conventional stance fighter, because Turner's a southpaw and because he's so tall, especially that height and that reach as well. It's going to add a different dynamic to what Moises had to deal with against Johnson. On the feet, honestly, I do expect Turner to do some really good work in this fight. I think he'll overwhelm Moises. I think he'll cause frustration. I think he'll hurt him as well. Moises has to get this fight down to the mat, as I've said now 3 or 4 times. If he does, it's going to give him a good chance of winning this fight. If he can stay in top position for long periods of time, it's not only going to look better for him in the judges' eyes, but it's going to increase that finishing probability as well, because he could get a submission over Turner if he's allowed to work for that length of time on the mat. But I think that Moises ultimately will score a couple of takedowns, for as long as this fight goes on. I think Turner will defend more takedowns than he gets taken down. I think when Turner does get taken down, I think he will be able to scramble back up to his feet relatively quickly. I think once Moises has lost a couple of positions, we might see him start to mentally break inside the cage, especially if Turner starts to tee off on him on the feet. So I think Turner's going to be more aggressive. I think he's the far better fighter on the feet. I think he's going to land the more volume. I think he's pretty good defensively in the areas where Moises has his advantages in this fight. And I think that's a key factor. I'm picking Jalin Turner to win this fight. And in the next fight, back in the middleweight division, we've got Bartosz Fabinski versus Andre Muniz. Bartosz Fabinski currently the minus 145 favourite. The comeback on Muniz at plus 125 as the underdog. Again, we've seen a bit of line movement in this fight. Bartosz Fabinski was around minus 185 a couple of days ago. A lot of money has come back in on Muniz, and I kind of get that as well. But where the value is for me in this fight, I think it's with Fabinski currently at minus 145. I thought at minus 185 it was a little fairer. I think that line was probably where I would have lined it. But at minus 145, I do side with Fabinski in regards to the value. As for where the line moves, I actually think the lines might close up a little bit further. A lot of people seem to be high on Muniz, and I do understand that he's got some stylistic advantages in this fight. So the more people that are high on Muniz, the more money's going to come in on Muniz, and the closer this line's going to get. I think we might head into the fight night with both fighters in the cage, with Fabinski roughly around the minus 130 mark, Muniz maybe at around plus 110. And as for how this fight plays out, as for how both of these fighters match up, it's a really interesting one. It's actually my favourite stylistic matchup in mixed martial arts. I love wrestlers versus grapplers because the fight's going to go down to the mat. Is the wrestling going to nullify the jiu-jitsu, or is the jiu-jitsu player going to submit the wrestler? Honestly, I love to watch these stylistic matchups. Fabinski, obviously the wrestler in this fight. Muniz, the jiu-jitsu player. We'll start with Bartosz Fabinski. This guy's just a takedown machine. He doesn't give you any nasty surprises inside the cage. You know what his game plan's going to be. His opponents and his opponents' coaches know what the game plan's going to be. At any stage that Fabinski is on his feet, regardless of what he's doing, in his mind he's just thinking about the next takedown. He's thinking about that next fix. That's all he's concerned about. Getting close, getting chest to chest, looking to dump his opponent on the mat, laying on them for as long as he can, and landing enough shots to make sure the ref doesn't stand him back up. In a nutshell, that's Fabinski's game plan. He came into the UFC as a middleweight. He dropped down to welterweight. His welterweight gas tank was a little bit sketchy in round one. You know, first round great, second round okay. Towards the end of the second round, it started to fade a little bit. Third round, although he could push through that third round, you were never confident that Fabinski was able to give anywhere close to 100%. But in his last fight against Darren Stewart, it was that weird Cage Warriors UFC crossover fight where the UK was actually locked down at 12 a.m. midnight that night. So it was that weird card where UFC London was cancelled. Fabinski was back up at middleweight, and I actually cashed him as a plus 230 underdog against Darren Stewart. But I'd watched the tape from when he was a middleweight. He looked good. His cardio looked better. And I assumed we were going to see that Fabinski against Stewart, and that's exactly what we saw. Fabinski was able to close the distance, get past that dangerous striking, dump Stewart, spend time on top of Stewart. If Stewart got back up to his feet, he'd just re-wrestle, get another mat return. Fabinski was just Fabinski inside the cage. Here though, against Andre Muniz, he's got a slightly different challenge. He hasn't got to get past dangerous striking. He hasn't got to get past knockout power before he can land his takedowns. He's actually going to be able to land takedowns relatively easily in this fight, and I think Muniz will actually welcome that as well. Like we've already mentioned, Muniz is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player. He's a legit black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's fine getting taken down. He'll throw submissions off his back. He'll throw up his legs for an armbar or for a triangle. If you try and stand back up, he'll attack your legs. He's the type of fighter that if he's taken down and his opponent stands back up, he'll just stay laid on his back, you know, baiting his opponent back into his guard because that's where he wants to fight, even if he's on his back. And that comes with some concerns for me because he's overly confident and overly happy to be laid on his back. Now that's great because if he can pull a submission off his back, then he's going to get wins. However, it's not often in the UFC at this really high level where we see fighters getting submitted by arm bars and triangles from fighters when they're in guard. It's not something that happens very often anymore. So my concern for Muniz here is if he's starting to throw up arm bars and triangles as Fabinski's laid on top of him and those submissions don't happen, he's going to be losing the rounds. And the sweatier that they get, the more tired that Muniz gets, the harder it's going to be to grab that submission. I think that Muniz is live for a submission off his back in round 1, whilst they're dry, whilst they're fresh. But I think if Fabinski takes Muniz down, really wears on him early in that first round, avoids the submission threats from Muniz as well, maybe Muniz stands back up and Fabinski drags him straight back down again just to expend that little bit more energy. I think the longer this fight goes on, the easier it's going to get for Fabinski, not only to take him down, but for to hold him down and remain safe as well. Like I say, Muniz poses a threat to Fabinski that I don't think Fabinski's had much in his career. Fabinski's definitely got to mind his P's and Q's in this fight. He can't go in there leaving his forearms on the mat. He can't go in there leaving his neck too exposed and getting stuck in guard. That's a guillotine threat. That's actually something that Fabinski does a lot as well. He does stick his head into that guillotine as he's taking his opponent down. But the one thing I like about Fabinski, and we saw this in the Darren Stewart fight as well, when Stewart was locking up these guillotines, Fabinski was getting a bit of air, remaining calm, and then looking to pass the guard to relieve that pressure. Or he just took Darren Stewart down and landed in half guard. Or another takedown they did to Darren Stewart when he grabbed hold of the neck was to sit him down on his butt and wrap Stewart's legs up with his own legs. Elevates the legs up. There's no guillotine threat there. So I do think Fabinski's aware of these submission threats that come against him whilst his opponent's on the back. I think Muniz is live in round 1 for sure. But like I say, once Muniz starts tiring, I don't think he's got the best gas tank. Once he starts sweating, it's going to become very, very difficult for him to submit Fabinski. And if there's any blood as well, that'll just add to the difficulty as well. So overall, I think the striking's going to be relatively close. I don't think any fighter's got a huge advantage in that department. I think Fabinski's going to be able to land takedowns. Should Fabinski remain safe in round 1, make it into round 2, I think the fight's going to get easier for Fabinski. I'm picking Bartosz Fabinski to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Montana De La Rosa versus Viviane Araujo. Araujo currently the minus 175 favourite. The comeback on De La Rosa at plus 155 as the underdog. In regards to the betting line and where the value is, I do think that the value is with the underdog in Montana De La Rosa. I don't think that the betting line should be this wide. Although, spoiler alert, I am picking Viviane Araujo to win this fight. I just think the line should be much closer. And I think as we get closer to fight night on Saturday, as they both enter the cage, I do think we'll see Araujo roughly around the minus 150, minus 145 line. I think more money will come in on De La Rosa because I think there's genuine value there for sure. As for how the fight plays out though, it's a clear striker versus grappler matchup in my opinion, although Viviane Araujo does have a jiu-jitsu game. She does have takedowns in a locker as well. She doesn't use them all that often, but that's just because her striking's so dynamic, especially in that first round. She uses a lot of movement to her detriment in some respects because that movement does take up a lot of energy and she can't sustain that over 3 rounds. So that might be an area for De La Rosa to exploit, to really get moving herself a little bit earlier on, make Araujo work harder in that first round and then try and take over round 2 and round 3. Like I say, I think the line should be much closer in this fight. I think this could be quite a close fight because if De La Rosa gets a hold of Araujo and takes her down, I think De La Rosa can spend time on top of Araujo. She's a good grappler, especially topside. She's good positionally. She doesn't really make many mistakes. And if Araujo is tired when De La Rosa takes her down, which in my opinion she might be because I don't think De La Rosa's going to be able to get a hold of her while Araujo's got this crazy movement going on. I think she's going to have to wait until at least round 2 to try and start shooting takedowns where she can legitimately complete them. So if Araujo slows down after round 1 and that allows De La Rosa to get close to her and take her down, and Araujo's clearly tired, then I think De La Rosa can definitely work on the mat for sure. But I just think whilst Araujo is active on the feet, while she's still got this good movement in and out of range landing shots, I think she will land those shots. I think she will rack up volume on De La Rosa. I think Araujo is definitely the better striker in this fight, so I think she'll land the volume. I think she could mess the face up of De La Rosa as well, draw blood. Again, that'll look good in the judges' eyes as well from Araujo's perspective. I just think the later the fight goes, if Araujo can't knock her out, which I don't think she will, I think De De La Rosa will take over later in the fight and maybe give the judges a tough decision to make on the scorecards. I still think that Araujo will win round 1. I think she'll come out looking a little better in round 2 as well. Maybe fade towards the end of round 2 in a round that De La Rosa may have already lost. And then if she loses round 3, she's still going to win 29-28. I do think that Araujo's going to get a hand raised at the end of the night. I'm picking Viviane, Araujo to win the fight. In the next fight in the heavyweight division, we've got a really fun fight. We've got Marcos Rogerio de Lima versus the much anticipated debut, hopefully this time, of Alexander Romanov. We've got Alexander Romanov, the slight minus 115 favourite, the comeback on de Lima at minus 105. Now, if you want to talk about line movement, at BetOnline, Romanov opened at minus 330 with de Lima at plus 270, and that line is just purely insane. And then when the line came over to the US, we had 5 dimes at one point having Romanov at plus 135. So we've seen Romanov at minus 330. We've seen him at plus 135. Now the fight's very close to a pick'em, which is where I personally think that the line is much fairer than any of those other 2 extreme lines. As for where the value is on this betting line, like I said with Michel, Pereira and Imadaev, if you have a good read on this fight, then it's definitely bettable at either side for sure, with the lines being quite close and quite low. As for where the line moves, I do think that we're going to see Romanov push to maybe minus 120, minus 125, being the slight favourite, because in regards to the stylistic matchup, which I'll touch upon very soon, I do think it does slightly favour Romanov, and I think other people will see that as well. But as for how this fight plays out, don't make any mistakes about it. De Lima is definitely live for a knockout in this fight. It's a striker versus a wrestler type of matchup. Yes, Romanov can strike a little bit. Yes, De Lima can wrestle a little bit. But predominantly, we've got De Lima with a Muay Thai style and Romanov with this bullish wrestling ability. So it actually makes for a really good fight. I think that De Lima has got to come out aggressive early in this fight. He's got to get off on his strikes. He's a really good striker, actually. He's got heavy kicks to the legs, to the head. You do not want to get hit by a kick from De Lima, no matter where he positions his kick on your body. And as for his hands, he's definitely got power in his hands as well. We saw that in his last fight. He was the first man to knock out Ben Sosoli. Yes, Sosoli wasn't the best fighter and arguably wasn't UFC quality either. But the fact of the matter is he was tough. Greg Hardy couldn't get him out. De Lima did get him out. De Lima seems to be good with his striking moving forwards or backwards as well. There's a bit of a difference because when he's moving forwards, he will take his time and he'll land singular hard shots to really break his opponent down methodically. But when he's fighting backwards, it's normally because his opponent is bull rushing him and he'll just swing wild hooks hoping one lands. That's what happened against Sosoli. And I think the same style of fight is going to take place in the cage here as well, because I think Romanov's going to come forward again bullishly, looking to close the distance. I think we're going to see De Lima winging wild hooks, hoping to catch him coming in. But the difference here compared to the Sosoli fight is Sosoli had no end product. Sosoli was a boxer. So when he was rushing in trying to get to De Lima, that was the end of the story. Whereas Romanov's different. He won't be rushing in to try and strike with him. He'll be rushing in to close the distance, get chest to chest, get his arms wrapped around De Lima's body and to drag him to the mat in whichever way that he chooses to. So that's a difference for me. And I don't think that De Lima's chances of knocking Romanov out coming in like that are overly high. It could definitely happen for sure. This is heavyweight and one good placed punch on a guy that's coming in to close the distance could be lights out. But Romanov can take that initial punch. He's not a chinny guy. And I think if it means just taking a little clip on the chin to get close to De Lima and to tie up with him, I think he'll be able to do that. And this is where stylistically I think the fight favours Romanov, because if Romanov comes out there in this fight and wrestles early from the get-go, I do think he's going to be able to get De Lima down. And De Lima on his back, in my opinion, he's like a tortoise that's been flipped on its shell. He's not so bad when he's on top of his opponent, but when he's on his back and he's flattened out, he doesn't really work for the get-ups. I don't think he has the qualities in his jiu-jitsu at heavyweight to start trying to sweep or reverse a big man on top of him, and that's what Romanov's going to be. Romanov is a big, heavyweight. So I think once Romanov's on top, I think De Lima's going to have a lot of problems. I think De Lima will try and explode a couple of of times once he realises he's getting beat up a little bit on the mat. And if he does explode a couple of times and doesn't have any success, that's going to hurt his gas tank, which is a big red flag with Marcos Rogerio de Lima. He had huge problems at light heavyweight with his gas tank. Although he doesn't have that big weight cut anymore to 205 pounds, we're still yet to see him tested in a fight that's been extended into the second and third round with a fast pace. The Visharek fight, which he went into the third round and won a decision, it wasn't a fast-paced fight. He didn't have too much pressure coming towards him. This fight's going to be a little different. If this fight does make the second or third round, we will have seen both fighters work, so we're going to see where Rogerio de Lima's cardio is actually at. So ultimately, I think it's imperative that Romanov takes de Lima down to the mat early in this fight, just like he did in his last fight. Go out there, spend 5 seconds just feeling yourself out inside the cage for that very short period, and then blast in at a takedown if possible. It's a smaller cage, so Romanov does have that advantage here in my opinion. But if Romanov doesn't come to wrestle in this fight, then he's going to get knocked out, or he's going to get broken down from the legs. He cannot stand in front of de Lima. For as big of a gap in skill the wrestling is in this fight, there's just as big of a gap in the striking as well. Romanov can strike. In fact, I don't think Romanov's striking is as bad as what de Lima's defensive wrestling is. But for sure, if Romanov doesn't shoot takedowns here, de Lima is going to crack the legs, he's going to break him down from the bottom, and he's going to wing hard punches at Romanov's head, and he'll knock him out at some point. So all I'm saying is Romanov better have this wrestling game plan, otherwise it's going to be a bad night at the office for him. But ultimately, Romanov's got that wrestling background from the Moldovan national wrestling team back in 2013, I believe. Every single one of Romanov's fights hits the mat in round 1 as well, so I do think he just loves to wrestle, and I do think he'll have that game plan here. And I think if he does have that game plan, even though de Lima's game plan will be to keep the fight standing and knock him out, I think the more dominant out of those two game plans will be Alexander Romanov's. I'm picking Alexander Romanov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cole Smith versus Hunter Azure. Hunter Azure currently the -210 favourite. The comeback on Smith at +175 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I don't think there's a great deal of value. I think the line's relatively fair where it is with Hunter Azure at -210. So I think if it drops to maybe -195, -190, we'll start seeing some value appearing on Azure. But as it is right now, I think the line's fair. I think he's the rightful favourite. And as for where the line moves, I do actually think we see more money coming in on Azure. It wouldn't shock me to see him go up to -225, maybe -230 come fight night. So again, that will just relieve any value that is there right now, in my opinion. As for how this fight plays out, I think it's going to be a really fun fight. We've got two guys that are really aggressive. I do want to see more of Hunter Azure's wrestling in this fight. Cole Smith's not an easy guy to take down. Miles Johns was a wrestler, and even he struggled at times taking him down, although Johns was a little bit smaller than Hunter Azure. Hunter Azure's a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker, a little bit stronger. But I think if Hunter Azure stands in front of Cole Smith fights really long, and he's actually got deceptive power. Now, the worry here in that respect is Hunter Azure was knocked out quite badly by Brian Kelleher not long ago. So if Cole Smith starts tagging Azure up, hitting him with hard shots, who knows how that chin's going to hold up. But I do like Azure's game. I like how he strikes. I like how he comes forward. He's got power in his left hand, in his right hand. He's got a good lead hook. He's got a good straight right. He's got good low kicks as well. He's a guy that comes from a wrestling background that Eddie Char over at Fight Ready, with all those great guys over there, have really developed him into a good striker as well. So now he's an all-round, well-rounded fighter, and I do like him. I do think that he's going to be able to land strikes on Smith. I think he's going to be able to force Smith backwards. I think he's going to be able to kick at the long legs of Smith as well. Ultimately, I think in regards to volume, it's going to be quite close if the fight goes the distance and goes to the scorecards. I think the volume will be close. I think they'll both land on each other. But I think the wrestling of Azure could play a part in this fight. And because of that, I just think it gives Hunter Azure more paths to victory here. Because he's got more paths to victory, because I feel that he's the better quality fighter slightly everywhere in the fight, I am picking Hunter Azure to win this fight. And finally, in the last breakdown of the podcast, we've got a fight that only got put together a couple of days ago. We've got Brian Kelleher versus the newcomer, Kevin Natividad. It should have been Brian Kelleher versus Ricky Simone. Unfortunately, Ricky Simone's cornerman, I think, got tested positive for COVID. Might have been Ricky Simone, I'm not too sure. I think I've heard conflicting stories. But unfortunately, we lost that fight. That was going to be a great fight. However, here we've got another fun fight because when you look into Kevin Natividad, the guy's going to be exciting and produce some good fights inside the UFC. No doubt about that. Brian Kelleher, currently the -225 favourite. The comeback on the newcomer Natividad at +175 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, on this betting line, I don't see too much value at all. I think the line is lined pretty accurately, if I'm being honest. I don't think Brian Kelleher should be at -250, -275 here. And in the same respect, I don't think he should be -200, -190 here either. I think it's lined just perfectly. So that does alleviate the value on either side, if I'm being honest, because Brian Kelleher should win the fight. But with all things considered, I don't think a lot of people are going to be rushing to the betting window to play him here. And as for where the line moves come Saturday night, I do think that we're going to see some fluctuation during fight week. I think we're going to see a bit of money coming in on Kelleher. Then I think people will see a little bit of value in Natividad, and I think it'll fluctuate just a little bit either way, but ultimately it's going to close roughly where we're at right about now, in my opinion. As for how the fight plays out, it's going to be a really fun fight. Kevin Natividad, he looks like he's got good boxing. He comes forward, he likes to strike. He's not so defensively aware on the feet, which is a big concern in this fight. So he can take a few shots. We saw in his last fight, he was eating way too many low kicks as well. He wasn't checking them. Again, that's a worry in this fight also. But from an offensive perspective, the dude's really fun. He throws in combinations. He's got hard power in his right hand when he finally lets it go, and when he lands clean, he will look for takedowns. But again, his takedowns aren't really well set up from what I've seen. They could be set up a little bit better in regards to him getting slightly closer to his opponent and using strikes to set those up. I just feel that although Natividad is a good fighter, and I think he's going to be an exciting fighter, and he's going to be in some exciting fights in the UFC, I just think he's maybe a little too short here to be a savvy veteran like Brian Kelleher, who's been in there with some of the best fighters in the division. And it's one of those fights where I believe Kelleher's got the experience advantage over Natividad. I think he's got the striking advantage. I think he's got the wrestling advantage. I think he's got the jiu-jitsu advantage. But in some of those areas, they're all slight advantages, but advantages nonetheless. I think that wherever this fight goes, Kelleher is just going to have the edge over Natividad, and unless Natividad lands something hard and knocks him out, I just don't see him winning the fight. So I am going to pick Brian Kelleher to win. I do think Natividad could take a round in this fight, but I'm picking Brian Kelleher to win the fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and once again guys, I'd appreciate all likes to the video and subscriptions to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK, and we also support the DraftKings and FanDuel players too with our daily fantasy sports content, which comes with our very own private chat room, so you can chat to our expert throughout every fight week too. We have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, and they are all at very affordable prices as well. Just hop on to MMAPlay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.